Welcome back. Well, a deepening crisis in the SAPS's ballistics division is threatening to derail thousands of criminal cases. Evidence before the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry this week revealing a backlog of more than 41,000 cases with severe staff shortages and delays crippling firearm investigations. The Western Cape is the hardest hit in the country, but let's unpack what this means for policing and justice in South Africa. Criminologist Simon Howell, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. It's interesting that the Western Cape, perhaps not surprising that the Western Cape does lead in terms of ballistics evidence and the backlog, just given the amount of gun violence in that province, not just over the past year, but over a period of many, many years.
Indeed. So I think, one of the key issues here is the sheer volume of evidence and the complexity of managing that evidence in a manner that doesn't break the chain of custody, or the chain of evidence. So, in this instance, it's that there is not only a large volume, but there's also human resource constraints and the need for ongoing analysis, which, in and of itself is quite complex. I think the Western Cape has been the hardest hit as a result and will continue to do so until such time as, some sort of institutional amendments are made and capacitated so that they can deal with this backlog in the short term.
So 41,000 criminal cases, that is the backlog in terms of ballistics and the SAPS's ballistics division. But perhaps what is more surprising, Simon, is that almost 22,000 of that 41,000 is from 2025.
Indeed. So, there has been a significant number of operations that have been undertaken by the police. And I think that, there's been an attempt to remove guns or get guns off the street and to deal with ballistic cases as they have occurred. The result of which is that, they've increased the volume of cases that are in the system, and there's a major backlog at the moment. So, on the one hand, it's good that they have managed to secure so many, or to put in so many cases, but equally, I don't think the systems have been designed or can take the sheer increase in evidence and the number of, or the volume of cases that are needing to be processed at this point in time.
So when we talk about institutional amendments, in fact, Simon, before we get to institutional amendments, I want to ask what is probably an obvious question for you, but why is it so important that we link firearms to particular crimes? Because according to the evidence before the Madlanga Commission of Inquiry, and it's because of a whole range of reasons, staff constraints is one of them, but it took police more than a year to link just 5 firearms to nearly 30 serious crimes, including 20 murders. Why is it so important to make those linkages?
Well, it's important primarily because this is evidence that needs to stand up before a court of law, and it's upon that evidence that convictions are made often. So finding those links and finding those relationships between guns and perpetrators is fundamentally important to solving crime and ensuring convictions. But of course that is made more complex, as we've discussed.
Yeah, it's just one sort of link in the chain of the justice system, right? One very, very important link in actually getting to the bottom of, let's say, what's happening with gangsterism in the Western Cape.
Exactly. It's a fundamental link. Without that evidence, there is no basis or often no basis to charge people or to convict people. So without the evidence, the cases fall apart. And this is unfortunately what has occurred in the past. And I think there's been a concerted effort to find the evidence and to make sure that the linkages are rock solid so that when they're presented before a court, that they stand up and hold true.
And of course, the more sort of shocking evidence to come out of the Madlanga Commission is that, and this is in relation to the murder of Armand Swart, that engineer who was gunned down just earlier this year. It was a case of mistaken identity. He was thought to be a whistleblower in a dodgy Transnet contract. Turns out it wasn't him. But he was shot 23 times. The firearms that were recovered at the scene were then also eventually linked to the murder of DJ Somebody and his 2 bodyguards as well. But the thing about that is that the firearms were confiscated, they were seized on the scene or at one of the scenes related to Armand Swart's murder, and then somehow they were used in the commission of the murders of DJ Somebody and those 2 bodyguards. How would that have happened?
Well, unfortunately, this is not the first time this has occurred, and there was a case of Colonel Prinsloo a few years back who eventually was prosecuted for this, and he was recirculating firearms that were in the storage facilities and were then sold back to people so that it could continue to commit crime. And this is a problem in that the firearms that are held and that are confiscated by SAPS need to be held somewhere. And in those instances, those venues may not be secure, or there may be forms of corruption which ultimately, result in firearms being recirculated into the system. And the result of which is, that it becomes easier to obtain firearms, and they are used in the commission of various forms of crime. So that there needs to be it's not just simply that the human resource capacity needs to be augmented in this instance. It's rather that the entire framework needs to be strengthened, so as that the storage capacity is increased and strengthened, as well as people are put on the ground and analysis can undertake the jobs that need to be done, so as that the cases can be dealt with in the courts.
So one of the suspects charged with the murder of Armand Swart, that's KT Molefe, when the raid was conducted on his home, there was an AK-47 among the firearms found there, which we know, Simon, is illegal for a civilian to own.
Yeah, very much so. The fact that there are AK-47s lying around in people's safes or even lying around in people's houses is severely problematic. And, there's a whole range of issues there, both in terms of the availability of firearms and the availability of high-powered or essentially war-related firearms, but also the fact that people are prepared to and want these. There's a broader societal conversation that needs to occur here around the ownership of firearms and the need for firearms, and whether that continues to exist, and in what capacity, and how best to keep firearms like that should they be needed.
So where do people get these AK-47s from? And again, that speaks to what appears to be a thriving black market for weapons.
Indeed. So, there is a large black market for weapons of various sorts. High caliber or high repetition firearms, which are not legally, or which are very difficult to own legally. There is a minor, route in which you can illegally own these if you have the right reasons and the right forms and the like. But those are very minor. Primarily, it's driven by the acquisition of those firearms from various sources, including the state, including the military and the like, and their resale in various forms and forums, so as that they are obtained by people who wish to use them for illegitimate or illegal purposes.
Yeah. Simon, I wonder whether we have a figure of how many dockets are sitting on the desks of detectives and officers across the country, sitting there waiting for the results of ballistics testing.
Well, I don't have a figure either, but I can assure you that it's in the tens of thousands at least. There's a significant backlog, and ultimately, so long as justice is delayed, justice is denied, and there's a need to process these applications as quickly as possible, and to process the cases as quickly as possible. But there's also a need, I think we need to have a discussion around the criminal justice processes and the way in which this remains a paper-based system, for instance. There ought to be better systems in place, so as that at least from a administrative perspective, these things can be speeded up, and the backlogs can be dealt with where needed, wherever the bottlenecks occur.
What happened to the 2004 tender? There was a tender which turned out to be, like so many of them, turned out to be awarded under questionable circumstances. Hundreds of millions of rand paid. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, Simon. But we still don't have what you've just described, which is meant to be a record-keeping system that is capable of tracking every single gun in the country.
Indeed, there was the tender put out, and someone was awarded it. I'm not sure what the result of that has been. It certainly hasn't been implemented in any significant level, and there may be isolated pockets of implementation, but I've yet to see it more broadly. There are of course internal systems of management within forensics, for instance, which are very good, but they don't extend beyond that. And the problem, of course, is that there are so many different players and different organizations involved in the criminal justice system. There is a need for a managerial system or record system that can extend beyond in each of those and across the whole range of organizations, and that has yet to be implemented at any serious level.
Look, and criminal enterprises depend on that, right? They depend on that system never getting sorted out.
Well, exactly. The failure of the system and the failure of the various aspects of it is the primary source of firearms for many people in this country. So, there's a desperate need for this to occur and for it to be sorted out. But until such time as it is, it remains an ongoing issue, and it's the reason why there are so many firearms available on the streets of our communities.
Yeah. So when we talk about, we talk about these broad strokes comments like we need institutional amendments, we need a complete system overhaul. These are things that are easy to say and perhaps hides the fact of just what a massive job an overhaul would be.
Oh yeah, I mean this is a complex system, I mean to have the chain of evidence maintained, to ensure that every single piece of evidence is recorded at every single turn, all the way from acquisition to the use in a court. Yeah, it's a very complicated system. But that being said, it's not that there haven't been systems like this implemented before, and it's not that there are no role models to go on. I mean, this is standard procedure in many countries, and frankly, there are many systems available. I mean, they do cost money, but considering their importance, one would have thought that we would have sorted this out by now.